also need to listen to our customers, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of surveys around the world, right? Which brings me to our topic today, make CX surveys useful again. Give me a little bit of explanation of this thesis. Why did you came up with this when I ask you what topics should be most interesting to talk in terms of CX insights?
It really started for me that, if you ask people, where did they get their start in customer experience? Like what part of the discipline did they start in? For me, it was insights. And it was the opportunity to be responsible for the global services surveys for customer satisfaction in our division in Xerox. And it was where I really started to want to understand, what do we do with surveys? What's the purpose of them? How do we actually use them? I've had a great opportunity over the years to work with Fred Reichheld himself and teams from Bain when we've implemented NPS at Philips. And, I've worked with the teams that develop, how do we do customer effort score? So I have done surveys pretty much in every way imaginable, from indexes to, the basics of customer sat and all the way through all the different types of metrics. And, what I found is that most people think that anybody can write a survey. And I feel like if I had a coffee mug that would say that, it would say anybody can write a survey, but then it would have a little caveat on it. It'd say anyone can write a bad survey, because that's what most surveys are. Because, it starts with, the purpose of the survey and what are you going to do with it? And I have spent hundreds, probably thousands of hours of my life arguing with people about points on a scale. Is it an anchored scale? Is it a, fully anchored or partially anchored or just on the ends? Or, all the debates about the survey design itself, rather than remembering, if you're going to ask for someone's feedback, then you are asking them to give you their time, and you should make that time worthwhile. And that means you should do something with it, which means that in a survey, the best surveys start with every single question serves a purpose. And that purpose had better not be to build a graph because we want to show our trends over time, or we need a dashboard, or we need a PowerPoint. That's not purposeful. If I'm asking you for your feedback, I am genuinely going to do something with it. I'm either going to try and learn more about a problem we need to solve, or I am looking to measure whether we're actually making progress while we're actively improving that part of your experience. Otherwise, I shouldn't be asking that question. I shouldn't be asking any. And so often now, after 20 plus years of designing surveys, I look at any survey I get and I go, what exactly are you going to do with my answer to that question? Because it doesn't, most of the time, they don't seem very actionable to me.
Yeah, that's true. I even remember a big company reading this verbatim of this customer. I will tell you because you don't read this verbatim or this text anyways. So customers know what's going on, that oftentimes this feedback is wasted, that's not used, at least most cases not more used than a word cloud, right? So
yeah, one of my favorite insights programs I ever built was at Concur. And part of it was because most of the time it starts like you get a survey and it comes from some generic email box. I actually changed our program and it came from my email. And we read every single survey. And what was interesting about that is if you make it from a person, you'd be surprised how many people just hit reply and say, I bet you're not going to read this or whatever. I replied to every single one. I picked up the phone and called people. Because you need to prove to them, I am willing to earn your trust. I am listening to your feedback and I will utilize it and I will act on it. And I know there was a lot of people going, you can't put your email on this, like on the survey. I'm like, why not? It's coming from a person, from a team. Why shouldn't it? Why does it have to come from some generic email box?
So the topic is make CX surveys useful again. And you bring the point that the survey needs to have a purpose. So basically the data really needs to be used to be useful. So how do we now make this surveys useful again?
I think one, you should start with how do you use your customer feedback today? And by that, for every question, you should look at it and say, if the purpose of this is just a trend line or reporting, and it does nothing else, you need to strike it. Every question that isn't actively used to actually improve the customer's experience needs to go. And then, the second part is you should look at where you survey your customers along their customer journey. And you should only be asking them for feedback on the moments that matter most. And out of those moments, which ones are you actively looking to understand or be able to actively drive change on? If you are thinking about your overall relationship survey, whether that's Net Promoter Score or customer satisfaction or some type of index, whatever your process is, those types of relationship surveys are really only purposeful if, one, you're taking that key metric question and tying it to behavioral data and operational data so that you could start tracking towards, likelihood to repurchase, retention, customer lifetime value. If you're not doing that work, then the metric isn't really serving any purpose other than giving you that same sort of trend line experience. Any other questions in the relationship survey should be doing that very first thing, which is identify what matters most to your customers. And that can change over time. And it's been my experience that when you gain customer trust, part of what you do that by is being very personal and relevant to their experience. The other part is telling them what you heard and what you did with the feedback. So for example, after years of doing this with Concur, I would get customers stopping me at customer events and saying, I have not gotten my survey yet for this year. Where am I in the queue? And I'm like, it's random. I don't know where you are in the queue. And they were like, okay, well, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed it. Because we not only actively used that relationship survey to prioritize things that went into the product roadmap, initiatives we did to improve, we did an annual report we sent to all employees and all of our customers. And what we did is we said, here's what we heard, and here's what we did with what we heard. And we look forward to hearing from you again next year. And for multiple year initiatives that were really large, we would give the update. Here's the progress we made, and here's some of the big things that we're going to work on this next year. That was rebuilding their trust that this wasn't just some survey, but instead it was quantifiable, verifiable feedback that we could use to significantly drive change. And that makes the survey useful. And if you aren't making your surveys useful, then I don't know what you're doing with your customers' time. And when you're a customer and you get that survey, do you ever hear back? It's not very often.
So the point is basically make it useful or scrap it, right? As an insight manager, I would say, okay, let's make it useful. But
I would agree.
But then eventually you need to be honest to yourself at some point. Sometimes it can't be useful because you don't have the handle on it to drive certain actions, right? So that's really the trade-off. You need to think for yourself, right? Should I really improve it or should I stop it for a year, right? Is this basically the...
I think you're correct. And one thing, I think it sounds probably those of the audience who are listening to this podcast are going, well, sure, Tabitha, you make it sound so easy. It's not like that process of making your survey program truly insightful and actionable happens overnight. It is a multiple year journey, and you do have to take the change in chunks It's not very likely that you're going to be able to walk into an insights role and suddenly be able to wipe the slate clean of all the surveys and then just redesign them from scratch. You have to take a very thoughtful and measured approach to determine what's going to convince your stakeholders of what surveys really should do. And it is when you can convince them that that quantifiable feedback that really represents your customer's voice of all shapes and sizes can be used to not only help them get funding and prioritization to make changes, but also they get recognition, not just inside, but from customers that they made an impact. Then you start to build more credibility and you can tackle more and more of the survey program and redesign it.
So what I'm also hearing is that building an inside program, an CX inside program, is not just one-off exercise. You build a great program and then it measures it and it's always giving you this great insights. Actually, it is more an agile procedure, right? So make sure it always is useful. It gives you the top topics, but then deep dive on what actually pops up, right? And yeah, always make sure that it is.
I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Say it again?
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
Just make sure that what you're measuring is linked to real world objects like revenue, like customer value, and so forth. That's what I understood.
Yeah. And, sometimes to build credibility, you have to find a part of the business that has a survey that needs to be redesigned, and you find a way to make it more valuable for them. Service is probably one of my favorites because they usually have some type of survey process going. But, the opportunity to redesign it to be actionable. Service is almost looking for ways to reduce call volume and improve employee agent performance and so forth. And many of them choose the more traditional surveys that have what you're used to looking at, either customer sat or customer effort score and things about the agent and maybe things about the process. If you can get them to agree to start to change even some of the survey so that you have actionable questions in there, then you use that. You can start to replace the questions in there that don't serve any purpose except an ongoing reporting metric, and you add value to them. Probably one of my favorites in services is, there's this concept that if you can just drive customers to self-service, then that will reduce our call volume. And we'll all be happier, except that some customers are actually really happy to self-serve, and you should have an effective customer feedback model to drive improvements in that, which means asking questions like, did you try to resolve this problem yourself before contacting support? Yes or no? No scales, just yes or no. Because everybody who says yes, those are all your knowledge base entries that need to be improved. And for everybody who says no, let's take our favorite password reset, for example. If you prefer to call, the amount of work it takes to change human behavior who prefers to make the phone call is very difficult. And yet I piloted something with a service organization where I said, why don't you just put password reset in the IVR in support? They call support. And one of the things is push 4 for password reset. We did it, and a lot of people pushed 4. Agents didn't have to do anything. It just carefully walked them through, what do you do to reset your password? People hung up, and they were happy. It was so popular that the support organization moved password reset up to number 1 on the IVR, and it reduced their call volume. And we found that out because we had one simple question in the survey. Did you try to resolve this question yourself or this problem yourself before contacting us? And then we looked at what was the tops for no, what was the tops for yes. So it's that ability to use feedback and marry it to actionable data that you can then go test and learn different strategies to say, how do we make this better? It's remarkable how many times customers will actually be much more happier as a result.